presenting Benny Goodman and his orchestra.
There we go. Good morning, everybody. Let me go fix this curtain a bit. Morning, Martin. Hey, Steven, over on YouTube. Hey, Karen. Welcome along, everybody.
And that was Benny Goodman's tuneful invitation, Let's Dance. And we advise you to take full advantage of it because we're going to present a half.
Hey, Betsy and Jerry.
Swing rhythms from the Joseph Urban Room of the
Hey, Denise.
Hotel in Chicago. The first tune, Farewell.
Hey, Christine. Morning, everybody, and all around. Morning, Chris. Hey, Evelyn. Hey, Kathleen. Good morning, good morning. Hey, Gladys. Welcome, everybody. Hey, Heidi and Bucky. Morning, good morning, good morning. Hey, Dorothy in Michigan. Hey, Cindy. You got it, Jordan, on Twitch. But I'm good, thanks. Hey, Jackie. Hey, Kathy. Hey, Ann and Bridget. Yeah, I'm glad not to be outside today. Hey, Gwendolyn. I just don't want to... I got so much back and forth going on lately. Hey, Rich. Dad. Hey, Ann. With the Grinch in hell. Why would the Grinch have gone to hell, though? Didn't his heart grow 3 sizes? Hey, Heather. Welcome, Georgia. Hey, all around. I realized I hadn't done this particular presentation in over a year. Like a year and a half now. Ah, hell, Michigan. Okay.
And that's just a polished idea of what
Morning,
we
Diane.
expect during the ensuing
Hey, Mom.
30 minutes. Now, Benny Goodman presents Helen Ward, his singing star, in I'm Shooting High.
Oh, yeah, my new painting. Right there. I'll show you the whole view. It really ties the room together pretty well, I think. An original Sick Fisher. Guten Morgen, Bob. Hey, Octavio. Welcome along, everybody. Yeah, Miles and Priya are both on the couch at present. I'm going to sneak over and let you see them. Just get a quick view of the paintings as I go. And how that ties the space up. And right down over here on the couch, we got 2 sleepy cats. Hey, James. James from Haley's Grave is in the house this morning. Hey, Becky. Hey, Aviva. Hey, Keely. I haven't had World Cup on at all. I haven't had much of anything on lately. Yeah, happy Hanukkah begins tonight. Cold and peoply out there. How cold is it in Georgia right now, James? How cold? Let us know. Right now in Chicago, I think it's probably the wind doing more than anything else. It's 19 in Chicago right now. Let's see what the feels like is. Yesterday was probably about the same, but it felt a lot colder outside to me. Presently 19, but feels like 6 outside right now. It was cold, but I'm inside. It's all right. We got radiators. They're dry, but man, those things work. Hey, Mona. It's good to stay in. I'm going to make some shepherd's pie tonight, I think. I was going to last night, but then Ronnie had a dinner, so Aiden and I went to Garib and Nawaz instead. I've been... Over and over, they got these new rice bowls you can get now with butter chicken and add paneer for $1. So a butter chicken rice bowl with paneer is delicious. Hey, Donna. Hope you enjoyed Graceland and Pullman. One in Minneapolis. I'll be in Minneapolis next month. So what kind of person takes a trip to Minnesota in January? Heroes. That's what kind. Now, Mike's my co-author on Flickering Empire, Michael Glover Smith's new movie is having its Minneapolis premiere in January, so we're gonna fly up for that, then do a day of Bob Dylan tourism. We know the guy who owns his boyhood home, so we'll go see that. Hey, Susan. Hey, Larry. Hey, Susan. 49 in South Georgia. Brigadoon is a musical I just couldn't get into. The backstory just doesn't work. I mean, this is supposed to be like night 3 of The Curse that they're on here. Like, you're already having all kinds of drama. This place is never gonna last. In about 3 weeks, you're gonna wake up and society will have crumbled around you. Yes, Sufganio time. I gotta figure out if I want to go to if I go to the proper bakery to get them, they're probably already out. But I definitely need to pick some up. Happy Hanukkah, Kathy. Nearly 10 o'clock. Will my shepherd's pie have real shepherd? I don't know if the Holmes was ever really known to eat anybody. He was a vegetarian in jail. I think it was just safer than as prison food goes. Timberley, yeah, we got a line on that of the high school auditorium in Hibbing. I was hoping I would find like they had some of my books in the library or something and I could use that, but nah. Now, Brigadoon does not work for me. I don't dislike it nearly as much as I dislike Dear Evan Hansen, though. I could rant for a long time about all the things I think are wrong with Dear Evan Hansen. Ugh. Not the least of which is putting social media in the background so it looks like it's contemporary, even though there's so little of it in the actual show that I could write it out in one pass. Okay, 83 degrees, you got us beat. That's Wisconsin for you. Hey, John. Boker Tov, Lisa. Hanukkah Sameach.
Along about the first one we think of is the Basin Street Blues. Here's Joe Harris to sing it, the Basin Street Blues. Won't you come along with me?
Kristen, what's the sky? Is that blue room? All right, we'll let Benny do another tune or so while we let people log on. Morning, Linda. Hey, everybody. I hope I remember all the stuff in this one. I know home stuff reasonably well, so I'm not too concerned about that. I'm going to block this off and let him be seen here. We'll move him over a bit. Hey, Rebecca and Lisa. It's 10 a.m. We'll give people another minute or two to log on. We always let Benny do one more song. So many people spend about a minute or so right at 10 o'clock trying to figure out Facebook Live. Morning, Augustin. Hey, Nancy. Welcome, everybody. Had a good day with the Coyotes yesterday. I about froze, but it kept on, ooh, take my picture here. Then it would flop over to another grave and just kind of stare at it like, okay, is this a good one? They never go where I want them to, but they had some ideas for me, and that's always nice. Hey, B, it's cold outside, I believe. It says, weather says it feels like 6. I haven't been outside, so I don't know. I've been up here all morning working through the Johann Hawk book stuff, as I do most mornings. Until I get it down. And so this is a very rough draft. I don't even know if I got into the part of the story yet where I'll actually open. Hey, Lynn. I don't think there's really enough of a market for like a big Johann Hawk info dump. He's not as famous as Holmes. I can't really do one like the size of the Holmes book. I mean, you could use this for like pest control, this book. Happy Hanukkah, Lynn. Light one candle for the Mercury children. Yeah, we got quite the display back here, but I'm a Hanukkah man myself. Heidi, for rough drafts, I use Scrivener. Then once I have the draft assembled, I'll probably switch over to Microsoft Word. Yeah, I heard Keanu is out. I thought it was a weird choice for Daniel Burnham anyway. I would have put him as Charles Bowler Atwood if he has to be an architect. Morning, Kelly. All right, that is Benny Goodman wrapping up live from the Congress Hotel in downtown Chicago, which various authorities assert H.H. Holmes can be traced to, though I say he cannot. He can be traced to a lot of places right by it, but I can't quite trace him to the Congress Hotel, let alone do I have any story about him stalking victims through there. I know exactly who made it up, though. All right, so welcome along, everybody. I'm Adam from Mysterious Chicago Tours. First time running this particular presentation in about a year and a half, if you can believe that. So welcome along, everybody. I'm Adam from Mysterious Chicago Tours. I've been a tour guide and historian here in Chicago for going on 20 years now. I've got about a dozen Chicago history books out. I'm on the History Channel and the Travel Channel all the time, so I am incredibly famous. Among my books are Ghosts of Chicago, now a rare collector's item, which incidentally I think I should still be getting paid for, but this is another one for which I have not seen a check in a long time. A lot of that going around. Graceland Cemetery, Chicago's Stories, Symbols, and Secrets, a place founded by one of Holmes' single biggest individual swindling victims. I did cover the Holmes case a bit in Murder Maps 2021 from Thames and Hudson, but most notably in this massive tome, this is just like the advanced copy right here, of H.H. Holmes, The True History of the White City Devil, 2017, distributed by Simon & Schuster. I also talked about him at length on a whole lot of History Channel shows. If they're trying to be serious about Holmes, they talk to me. If they're just doing the urban legends, they'll often decide not to fly me out there after all. But now and then, even the wildest shows do use me, like American Ripper on the History Channel a few years back. I was on about half of the episodes of that one. Had a great time working on it. Their whole contention that Holmes could have possibly been Jack the Ripper was utterly ridiculous, but it was still fun to work on. You should see some of the stuff I talked him out of following. But all right, so anyway, right now I am at work on a new book about Johann Hawk, another serial killer who the police spent a lot of time following up leads that he might have worked for H.H. Holmes or known H.H. Holmes at one point, which he almost certainly did not. But it's a great way to have a lot of the same characters from the last book kind of make cameo appearances coming back. One of Holmes's lawyers figures into the case, tried to save Johann Hawk. The pharmacist who ran the drugstore at the Murder Castle building shows up again. The skeleton articulator guy makes a repeat appearance. A couple of the detectives show back up again. Good way to bring back the old favorites, as it were. So, all right, we're going to do some Holmes basics. When we talk about Holmes, we usually associate him with the corner of 63rd and Wallace. And incidentally, Hawk lived. Like, you could throw an egg from this spot and about hit the place where Hawk was living at his last Chicago address. But right over here in this grassy knoll next to the Englewood post office, this is where Holmes building would have stood. The one that we now call the Castle. Now, it would have been running alongside Wallace Street for the most part. This is a view from the corner. Like, that stop sign that you might have seen would be right about where the corner is here. It wasn't really that big of a building. It was only about 45 feet wide, just about covered the grassy knoll space here. And there's that stop sign again. But this was Holmes himself as he appeared in 1895. Now, he built the building, the castle space, back in 1887. Initially, it was a one or two-story building with retail on the first floor and apartments on the second. 1892, he added a space that was, he told everybody was going to be a hotel space for the World's Fair that was coming up the next year. Though by all accounts, all reasonable evidence is that he never actually finished anything there. But we're going to cover just a very basic bit of Holmes' background. March of 1893, about 2 months before the World's Fair opened, this article ran in the Chicago Tribune, hid in secret rooms. It seems this fellow H.H. Holmes had been buying up stuff for his upcoming hotel space, like furniture, crockery, bedding, everything you might need to outfit a hotel. But then instead of paying for it, he was just hiding it in some hidden rooms on the third floor for a while until he could sell it for cash. He was doing things like wallpapering over doors. There was a hidden compartment in between the first and the second floor. But eventually the Toby Furniture Company found out about it. Someone took them around and showed them where all these hidden rooms were. And this actually made the news. This article pretty much killed any chances that it was ever actually going to be a hotel during the World's Fair. So Holmes promptly set fire to the third floor for the insurance money, then spent a few months trying to run away from the insurance companies who were not fooled for 1 second. But somewhere along this time, he had a friend named Benjamin Peitzel who owed him a favor for getting him out of jail in Indiana. He said, "Ben, here's what we're going to do now. We are going to go to Philadelphia and fake your death next fall. We'll take a body that looks like you, say that it was you, take that life insurance money, and live like kings. Damn hell-ass kings." So Peitzel went along with this. He probably should have known better, but he did owe Holmes a favor. But then once they got to Philadelphia, Holmes may have at one point actually been planning to fake Peitzel's death, but decided it was easier just to kill him properly. Then started traveling around with 3 of Peitzel's children. November of 1894, a couple of months after that murder, the insurance company put 2 and 2 together, and Holmes was arrested just as a swindler. But a lot of people started coming up saying, "Hey, I used to see him going around with this woman in Chicago. I don't know where she is." And then they remembered, hey, didn't this guy have a building back in Chicago that was supposed to be full of hidden rooms? Don't you think we ought to investigate that? And then they decided, nah. And just kind of forgot about it for about a year until they started finding bodies. They found the bodies of 2 of Peitzel's children that Holmes had been traveling around with. Later, they would find one more. At that point, they busted into this space and started digging around trying to find what could have happened to the 5 or 6 people who had disappeared out of the place. There's not a whole lot of really good data. This was really not a professional caliber investigation by the police. They just kind of walked around saying, well, there's a rock. He could have hit people with a rock. Or there's a rope. Maybe he was hanging people. Walked around, interviewed people at the drugstore, let reporters just wander around and handle all of the evidence. They'd find bones and say, we found the bones, and then it would turn out that they were soup bones. But then, right as the investigation was wrapping up in Chicago, the New York World published this article called Castle of a Modern Bluebeard. This is like way into like the page 20 somewhere. This, if you've ever looked up the Holmes case, you have probably seen this diagram they had with rooms named like the Room of the 3 Corpses, the 5-door room, the asphyxiation chamber, the death shaft, the maze. Some of this was based on actual reporting. Some of it they really just kind of made up, including this whole notion, this was supposed to be a hotel. What if Holmes was luring people here? The list of people who went to Chicago for the fair and never returned was a long one, and in the greater number foul play was suspected. And they speculated maybe he was taking out ads for people. And the paragraph there is reprinted in just about everything that has been written about Holmes since. They single-handedly invented the legend of the murder castle here with this one paragraph. And this is a New York World Sunday supplement. Now, the New York World is sometimes described as like a combination of the New York Times and the National Enquirer. It was the first of what they would later call the yellow newspapers. Eventually, Hearst would open up the Journal in the same city, then expands to Chicago a few years after that. And really, if you look at newspapers from that era, they really have not been well studied outside of their connection to the Spanish-American War. But really, in general, the yellow papers, like the Journal, the Chicago American, and the New York World, were not less accurate than anybody else. In fact, they had the best investigative journalism departments of anybody. In Chicago, they had, like, telephone operators, bellboys at all the hotels. 9 out of 11 of the coroner's deputy were on retainer to give them all of the best scoops and the best feeds. But they were also known for things like the Sunday supplements, not just in the yellow papers, but really in even the most conservative papers at the time, were the Sunday supplements were like the weekly world news. Articles about Bat Boy would not have been out of place in a Sunday supplement, but this is the article that ended up getting refreshed. Holmes was eventually convicted of just one murder. Later, we would come to call the term murder castle didn't really come about till the 1930s. Before that, it was usually just known as the Holmes Castle or the Castle of 63rd Street. Now, shortly before he was executed in 1896, Holmes confessed to having killed 27 people. But of those 27 people, about half a dozen were still alive. Others were known to have died of natural causes or something. But this was jointly paid for by Hearst's brand new New York Journal and the Philadelphia Inquirer, which was a very reputable paper at the time. And then shortly after he was hanged, he took most of it back and said he'd really only killed 2 people, just Emmeline Sagrand and Julia Connor, right before he was hanged in May of 1896. So, what we're going to do today is we're just going to kind of go through a list of his known victims. Of the known victims, there are about 9. It's not anywhere near like the 200 that comes to come around now. There are a few others that I suspect he possibly killed. It's a situation where we just don't have enough data. But we'll go through some of the known ones, some of the suspected ones, and some other stuff as well. So we'll start with, in fact, right here across the street from the castle building. We'll kind of do the spin here. Right here we would have been standing in the restaurant space in the castle, and across the street is the Aldi. This was Dr. Holton's pharmacy where Holmes started working in 1886, the earliest point when he was using the name H.H. Holmes, his real name being Herman Webster Mudgett. Now, since the 1940s, everybody who's told the story of the Holtons say that old Dr. Holton was slowly dying of prostate cancer upstairs while his poor hapless wife tried to operate the pharmacy herself, so she was only too happy to hire this energetic young go-getter Holmes, and then shortly thereafter the Holtons disappeared and Holmes told everybody they'd gone to California. Now, this is one that I got kind of curious about early in my Holmes research, because reading through the 1890s newspapers, I noticed people talked about Mrs. Dr. Holton, but nobody ever said that they were missing. And at the time, there was a period where people were accusing Holmes of having murdered anyone they hadn't seen in 2 weeks. So I finally did some digging, finally found out the doctor was named E.S. Holton. People had generally assumed it stood for Edward or Edgar. Turned out there was a national medical directory that said it was really Elizabeth Sarah Holton. She was not an old woman at all. She was only a couple of years older than Holmes herself. Her husband had some kind of job on the railway. She had in fact been at the University of Michigan just a couple of years before Holmes was there, so they probably had mutual friends. They sold the pharmacy to Holmes. He did do some swindling, and they had an awfully hard time getting him to pay up, but he did buy that one legit. They remained around the neighborhood for some time and are actually buried not too far away from the castle building, over at Oakwood Cemetery. We'll move over to see there. Now, they're right up over here. They all lived well into the 20th century. Or they both did. One of their daughters died in 1895, which might explain why they weren't talking to the press in 1895. They were in mourning. Yeah, there they are. Here's my selfie at their graves. So Holmes is off the hook for those ones anyway. But it was shortly after he bought that pharmacy that he bought the land across the street where he started building the building we now call the castle. 1889, the first victim I know of who moved into that place showed up. Now, before that, he had operated for a while in New York. In the early days of his career, there's a couple of stories about him killing people in his hometown that don't really have any backing whatsoever. After graduating from medical school in Ann Arbor, he operated in New York for a while doing like swindles. There was something to do with like hoarding vaccines that were going around. Then, even though he was married to a woman back in New Hampshire, his hometown, named Clara, he eventually met a woman by the name of Myrta Zutik Belknap and married her. Now, around this same time when he was after college, he would later confess to having killed an old classmate named Robert Leacock for the insurance money. Now, there's just not enough data to know for sure here. We know that Robert Leacock died fairly early on after graduating from college. He was in Holmes' graduating class, but he lived clear up in Canada, and exactly what we know about him is very, very slim. There's nothing that really backs up the idea that Holmes killed him. Late 1889, a woman moved into that castle building by the name of Julia Connor, along with her husband Ned, who got a job working in the jewelry counter inside of the castle drugstore. It was probably Julia's idea. She seems like she wanted to move to the big city. Ned eventually moved back to Iowa, where he was from. I've never found a photograph of Ned. I found like his family Bible is floating around online, but not a photograph of him. But like most people in this saga, he's a white guy with a mustache. Julia's signature shows up on a few things. Holmes started having an affair with Julia fairly early on. Ned knew about it. They eventually separated and moved out, but he remained in contact with Holmes. Later, he would tell the police that one time Holmes came to him and said something about Julia that he wouldn't have known unless he was sleeping with her. We don't really know what. This is actually a promissory note in which Julia borrowed money from Holmes. This was kind of a scheme he had. He would hired her as a bookkeeper, but instead of paying his employees, he would just say, what I'm going to do is make you a part owner in the business. I'll just need you to pay up a little bit to buy into the business. And this is a receipt for how much of it she had paid back. That's all in Holmes' handwriting. You can see his signature on there 3 different times. I've been through enough of his paperwork that I generally know when I'm looking at his actual signature and handwriting versus like a clerk's copy. You see a lot of clerk's copies. But Julia lived here along with her daughter Pearl, who was 4 years old when they moved in. 2 years later, when Pearl was 6, Julia and Pearl were supposed to go back to Davenport, Iowa for Julia's sister's wedding. But Julia never showed up. Neither did Pearl. Shortly thereafter, Holmes started going to Julia's father and going to Ned saying, hey, do you know where Julia and Pearl are? I need them to fill out some paperwork. They don't work for me anymore, but they must be around here someplace, right? Holmes, of course, knew perfectly well that they were not. They were dead. Exactly what happened with Pearl, we'll never really know. One thing Holmes was fairly consistent on later on, though, was saying that Julia had died during an abortion. He had gotten her pregnant, said it's okay, we can take care of it. He sometimes claimed that he didn't actually do it himself. And it's also entirely possible that if he had, he might not have really meant to kill her. By no account was this guy a good doctor. One of his professors said he was only graduated out of pity, and this would have been years after he had been in any kind of medical practice whatsoever. So this would have been a dangerous operation that he might just not have been very good at. But while they were digging down in the castle, there's also her name appears on some paperwork. He had founded a company under her name right before she disappeared. And then when they eventually started digging out in this place, they did find some bones that were apparently human. They don't survive. There's not a good enough description of them to know for sure. But there were some finds of what appeared to be the bones of a woman and a girl. A woman about Julia's age and a girl about Pearl's age. That's really kind of what we've got of it. Mostly just kind of junk that they found here. But Holmes had a story ready on this one, which indicates to me that he probably did expect them to find a few things. We go all the way through here. We're going to come underneath this clock. We'll be in the space where McCoy's European Hotel stood back in the day. Holmes had this whole story. It was like, it was back right after college. My friends and I were staring starvation in the face. We thought we could make some money by swindling an insurance company. But we had this whole plan where we were going to say our friend had killed his wife and daughter and himself. Now, my job was to go to Chicago and get some bodies that would be substitutes for the wife and the daughter. So I got the bodies I got the bodies just nice and legally. Medical students can get bodies. So I went to McCoy's European Hotel and put them into a barrel until such time as they were needed. Then from there, now here's one of the weird things is how did he get the bodies into the European Hotel to put them in a barrel in the first place? He then said he put them in storage at a nearby warehouse, and then they chickened out and decided, these insurance company guys are too smart for us. We'll never get away with this. But then when he built his own building, he took the bodies out of storage and had them buried in the basement. So if you find any skeletons, that's all you found was some old insurance dupes. That's what he told through his lawyer anyway. The mere fact that he had this story ready to go indicates to me that he did probably expect that they were going to find some bodies down in the basement, at least those two. Julia disappeared late 1891, so did Pearl. He never really indicated what would have happened with Pearl. The most likely explanation would be that he just kind of poisoned her with cyanide. The stories you hear about like gas chambers and killing rooms all over the hotel are generally nonsense. From what we know of his killing methods, he usually used poison. A few months after Julia and Pearl disappeared, Holmes took up with a young woman named Emmeline Segrand. This is Emmeline Segrand. There's not a confirmed photograph of her, but if you look down the block here, little ways down Madison, you can see all of these windows right below me right now. That was the location of the McVickers Theater. There were apartments in that building. We know that Emmeline went to visit a friend at McVickers Theater building one time and told about this new fiancé she had. She told a lot of people she was getting married, but always gave her fiancé a different name. I think it's because she knew that Holmes was actually still married to Murda. The impression I get is she was dating Holmes and thought that Murda was sick and dying and that one day soon Murda would die and she would marry Holmes, but for now they had to keep it on the down low. But we do know, there's not a photo for sure, but there was this box that they found while they were doing American Ripper, a box of pictures that had some kind of connection to Holmes, nothing that we could really confirm. We spent a whole day playing like Guess Who with all of these pictures, and there was this picture that looked about like Emmeline and was taken at Stevens Photography in the McVickers Theater building. There's not really enough to go on. If it had said Emmeline on the back or even just her initials, I would be prepared to say, yeah, that's got to be her. But it's a pretty good provenance for things like this. Much better than when people usually send me like pictures that are supposedly of Holmes and it's just some guy in a mustache that can be traced to somebody else. But this one, we've got one that looks like her. It's about the right time period. It's from a box of stuff with some kind of a Holmes connection and taken in a building that we can trace Emmeline to. That's about as good as these things get. But we know that she had several pictures of her taken over a period of time. She seemed to like having her picture taken. She was a very romantic young woman, by all accounts. She had worked previously at the Keeley Institute down in Dwight, Illinois, where I sometimes pull off for gas on the way down south. Keeley was an alcohol cure institute. They had this thing called the Gold Cure, which did not actually contain any gold, but it was mostly quackery, but at the same time, they were about the first institution to really say that alcoholism isn't personal failing, it is a disease that needs to be treated as a disease. There's some evidence that Benjamin Peitzel was actually in Dwight for a while. He said someone overheard him saying the Dwight Institute didn't do him any good whatsoever. Very, very vague. But Emmeline herself is known to have worked there till eventually getting fired for just being too romantic, as they said. So she was the kind of person, when she wrote letters, at the end of it, she would type in a whole quote, "Lives of great men all remind us, we may make our lives sublime, and departing leave behind us footprints in the sands of time." So she's the kind of person who would type all of that out at the end of a letter to her cousin or something. I feel like we could tell quite a bit about her from that. Now, this was a letter to B.J. Segrand, who was her cousin, a dentist in Chicago, and he himself has quite an interesting history. B.J. Segrand is not only a witness to the Castle building, he went to meet Emmeline and walked around it and thought it was a total dump, but he figures a little bit into the Lutgert Sausage Factory murder from a few years later, and also is known as the father of Flag Day. So he's like, he pops up so much, he's like the Forrest Gump of crime and patriotism. Now, Emmeline disappeared December of 1892. This is a letter that Holmes wrote to her family from prison saying, Emmeline Cigrand, I very much regret to say, is dead. I will shortly have furnished to the relations the true and authentic and etc. cause of death, etc. Very truly yours, H.H. Holmes. This was sent out from prison. He did write a letter that he put to his collection agency manager to deliver to them. We don't know the actual contents of the letter. It does not survive itself. But the general gist of it is that he said that she too had died during an abortion. And that was something he was fairly consistent on. When she disappeared, he told everybody that, oh, she went off and got married to some guy by the name of Robert Phelps. Do you believe that? She's gone off and moved to Europe. He is even said to have put an ad in her local paper. I couldn't find her. The librarians there looked for me and couldn't find it. But apparently he wrote to the local paper talking about how she moved to Chicago where she met her fate. It's a fairly common line in writing about people meeting their future spouse in newspaper articles from back then. But still, you can kind of imagine him grinning saying that. Now, BJ himself also wrote a whole book called The Rise, Fall, and Revival of Dental Prosthesis, an introductory lecture. It's not exactly a page-turner. But that takes us through late 1892. Early 1893, a woman moved to Chicago by the name of Minnie Williams, who initially lived here on Roslyn Place. The place where she was living is still standing. It's down right below me right now. It's a really cool street up by Lincoln Park, way on the other end of town from the castle, really. But of all of the various victims, most of them you can kind of see that they were people looking for a more exciting life and just ended up with Johann Hawk. Sorry, with H.H. Holmes. My brain is still kind of in Hawk mode. But Minnie doesn't really fit into anything. There's nothing about her that quite works. Reports about what she was like vary quite a bit. There's this one terrific newspaper article about her. She dealt in mystery. Minnie R. Williams, home stenographer, kept her identity to herself. Now, Minnie, we do know, was born down south. Her parents both died when she was very young. Her siblings were all split up. They all went to live with various relatives. Her brother ended up dying in a smelter accident in Colorado. She herself eventually went to Boston to study in a conservatory. This is a program. This is actually where we get her middle name, Minnie R. Williams. Minnie Rayford Williams portrayed the emotion of ingratitude in a tableau. A tableau is one of those theatrical things that was big at the time. It really mainly survives now in that parody on The Music Man, where the women are going, one Grecian urn. But she was portraying ingratitude. There is this one picture of her that we can actually confirm. Not to mention, there's a picture in this program that kind of looks like her. I can't trace it to anybody else in the program. It looks about enough like her that I would say I would at least give it a possible. But she ran out of money. She had been trying to launch a theatrical career, but ran out of money, told one of her guardians, I guess it's time I got a real job. So she moved to Chicago, where she got a job working for H.H. Holmes. Now, eventually, she seems to have known a little bit more about what was going on as far as Holmes's various real estate swindles than anybody else. She had a reputation among people who knew her as a man-hater. They were all kind of surprised to find that she had taken up with a guy. The impression I get is she kind of thought that she was using him to get the money to relaunch her theatrical career. But Holmes ended up renting an apartment with her near Lincoln Park, and then they brought in her sister, Nanny Williams, who she had grown up kind of forgetting she even had a baby sister. They were reunited in their late teens and ended up living together. Here's an earlier shot of Minnie. This would have been, this was in a newspaper. It would have been a drawing of a photograph. They weren't quite to publishing. They were still about 3 years away from publishing photographs in newspapers at this point. Here's one that I wish survived. I think this one kind of captures her image and her essence, as we understand it, a little bit more than the photograph does. And here's her signature on some of the paperwork. In this, Holmes is referred to as H.S. Campbell and a couple of other pseudonyms. So here we have some evidence that Minnie knew that Holmes was operating under different names. Cover up here. This is about where they lived in Wrightwood, on Wrightwood Street. It's difficult to tell for sure. The houses were all renumbered, and we've got the address of the numbers, but the renumbering guide isn't 100% reliable, and some maps that were drawn at the time don't really line up to where we would go with. We actually do have a diagram of what the inside of the house was like. We have a map of about where it would have been near Wrightwood and Lincoln. But July of 1893, Nanny wrote a letter back to her old guardian, Aunt Lucy, saying, "So, this is wonderful. I'm about to go overseas with Brother Harry and my sister and her new wonderful husband. Maybe I'll study art over there. We've had all we can take of the World's Fair, so we're going to go off traveling. I'll study art in Europe, so if you don't hear from me for a long time, don't worry about it." So this is frankly kind of suspicious. A lot of people thought that Holmes wrote that letter out himself. I think more likely Minnie wrote it out herself. Nanny and Minnie both disappeared around July of 1893. Holmes later would say that here's what really happened there is Minnie killed her sister and I helped her get rid of the body. She was jealous that I was paying so much attention to her, so she killed her with a footstool, and I helped get rid of the body over in Lake Michigan. But now, if you hear about any other dead bodies, that's probably her too. She's just making it look like me because she's afraid of getting blamed for the death of her sister. Eventually, he would flesh this out quite a bit. But right after the two of them disappeared, a whole lot of real estate transfers were made in her name, including Holmes suddenly had possession of some land that she had owned back in Fort Worth, Texas. Now, after Holmes was put on trial for insurance fraud, he had them put this coded message into the paper saying, well, she's gone off to London with the kids. They're still alive. She just took the kids over to London. So they put this coded message in the New York Herald on the off chance that she might see it, but of course she did not. Later on, he had like a whole long, rambling story about Minnie's, more so than he had about anybody else. The Williams sisters' self-appointed lawyer from Texas, a guy named William Capps, showed up in town. Generally made a fool of himself, even by the standards of the day. But I suspect down in Texas there might still be some paperwork about these two. Also, here's a possible one. This is a space we used to call the body dump on tours. It's all been built over with condos now. But up around here, they eventually found that there was a building that Holmes had apparently owned for a while and said was a glass bending factory. They found like the wreck of a big furnace and some of his paperwork in here. It was very close to the home of a woman named Emily Van Tassel, who is one of the biggest puzzles in the Holmes case. I mean, she shows up in all the confessions, she shows up in a lot of articles, but her name is different every time. One version of the confession, she's Rosine Van Jassend. Another, she's like Anna Van Tassel. Police officers refer to her under a bunch of wildly different names. Her real name was Edna Darby, usually went by Emily Van Tassel, and it gets weirder and weirder. But her mother believed that she had started working for Holmes in a candy shop that he owned under the name Frank Wild on Milwaukee Avenue, not too far away from the body dump site. Later, when shown a picture of Holmes, she said, no, that's not him. But then she saw a picture of Benjamin Peitzel and said, no, maybe that's the guy. So I think the police generally believe that she was just kind of looking for, her mother was just kind of looking for closure about a daughter who had disappeared. Later on, one of the detectives said she had been found alive someplace, but it was really just never confirmed that well. It's one of those stories we just don't have enough data, and what data we do have is contradictory and weird. They didn't follow up on a lot of these. So another one, when Holmes was writing, he also took credit for having murdered a woman named Anna Betts. And he said the newspapers have consistently said that I murdered Anna Betts, and now I guess I might as well admit to it. And there is this death certificate, Virginia Anna Betts, died at the age of 24 in 1892. Had been in Chicago for 18 years, lived on 631 63rd Street. So this would have been right down the block from the Castle building. Cause of death here is given as apoplexy, which just means it's died very suddenly at the time, just sudden death. And she's buried down at Oakwood. Well, that's very interesting. I wonder if that might be a good one for Find a Grave Friday sometime. But what makes this suspicious is we have a death certificate saying she died of natural causes, but that's a kind of a vague natural cause. And even though Holmes said the newspapers have been so consistent in saying that I murdered Anna Betts, I've never found a paper that claimed that. Certainly not one that he would have had access to. The fact that he was so sure everybody was blaming him for the death of Anna Betts is frankly a little bit suspicious. They also spent quite a bit of time running into this story about a woman named Mabel Barrett, who apparently had met Minnie and Holmes in 1893, someplace in Boston. I just don't think there was too much to this story. There's probably she was swindled by some other guy with a mustache. It happens sometimes. There was also a weird story that in the summer of 1894, when Holmes was traveling around, he had gone to Mississippi with Benjamin Pitezel and murdered a guy by the name of George H. Thomas, who was later said, no, they later revised it and said his real name was Thomas Gregson. Now, there's just not a lot of data here. We know that Pitezel did go to Mississippi. We don't know if Holmes went with him. The story all comes from Yehu Amaziah Orr, who was a judge in the area, who said that one of Holmes's wives had come and filled out an affidavit about this, that he was just saving until it was needed. Well, we don't have that much data. Pitezel was there to buy lumber, and the story was that they took this Gregson guy out in a boat and killed him. He was the one who gave the name of Thomas Gregson. He's the sole source on the story. He's also kind of tied to history himself. He is the last surviving member of the Confederate Congress, which to me indicates he is an unreliable source and we should just ignore the old bastard. Now, Ned also had a sister, another possible victim, Gertrude Connor. His sister is one that Holmes took credit for killing and was really the first person who he was accused of killing. Back in 1891, she had been working for Holmes, went back to live in Iowa, and about 6 weeks later, died very suddenly at her house. And this was heart disease, neuralgia. But when he told the story back, Frederick Nin, one of Holmes's business partners, said, "Holmes, you have killed her." And Nin said, "Oh, pooh, what makes you think that?" Now, the doctor said specifically that no, absolutely, she died of heart failure. It wasn't murder, no matter what Holmes says. And Connor himself wrote into a paper saying, "You state that she died 48 hours after her return, which is false. She died 7 weeks from the day. You also state that your brother discovered that Holmes had ruined her and gave her medicine which caused her death. It can be proven that no man had ruined her." This is him saying we can prove that she was a virgin. This is almost suspicious to me. They were like, he was so concerned with his late sister's reputation, so concerned about any story that she might have had sex with H.H. Holmes, that he might have rather let Holmes get away with murder than admit that she might have had sex with him, even if it was not consensual. That's just, the term ruin comes up a lot in these stories. Very 19th century kind of thing. Move down the road a little bit here. Of course, Benjamin Pitezel is one victim that we can talk about for sure. In fact, the one he was ever convicted of murdering. Right about here was the Chemical Bank building in Chicago. Now, at one point, Holmes didn't operate the drugstore in his building for long. He found that it was more fun to make money on swindles and schemes. Went to a guy named A.J. Warner, said, "Warner, I know this special way to bend glass. Why don't we start a glass bending company? In fact, since it's your money, we'll call it the Warner Glass Bending Company." He would later claim that he built a glass bending oven and shoved Mr. Warner into it and killed him. Mr. Warner was still alive and well at the time. But he took up an office in here where they would meet with investors. Another guy in the same building at the time was Benjamin Pitezel, who had an office there where he was promoting an invention of his, which was a patent coal bin. It was a kind of a coal bin that you could keep in the house and not track dust all over the place. Thereafter, they must have met up and found that they had a shared love for dishonest business practices. When Holmes' copier machine company went out of business, it was sold off to Mr. Pitezel. Then, after Holmes got out of Chicago to get away from the insurance companies in late 1893, the two of them went down to Texas, where they built a whole new castle building on Minnie Williams' land, which Holmes claimed to have bought for $1. And there's a diagram of this one. They called it, what the newspaper article said, if this were an old ancient castle, they would call it the Castle of Many Doors. I think they probably could have done better than that. But this was really just the kind of built on the same system as the Chicago one, buying stuff on credit, then not paying for it. I'm not sure Holmes ever really set foot inside of the place. It was after that, Pitezel was sent to Philadelphia to await further instructions. He rented this place on Callowhill Street. And then after a certain time, Holmes came in and killed him using chloroform poisoning, had him buried in a pauper's grave in the Mechanics Cemetery. Now, eventually, they disinterred him several times. This was his skull, which was in evidence, and eventually given back to his wife, Mrs. Peitzel. It is probably buried in the old cemetery in Galva, Illinois, but they lost all of their records in a fire years ago, so we don't really know. But Holmes had gone to Philadelphia to identify the body in order to get the insurance money, and brought along his 14-year-old daughter, Alice. All they showed Alice was the teeth, but she made the identification. That meant that she knew her father had not faked his death, as Holmes was still telling his wife he had. So Holmes started traveling around the country with Alice, Nellie, and Howard. Howard disappeared first, but Alice and Nellie were found first. They were eventually found buried in a shallow grave in this house Holmes had rented with them in Toronto for a brief period. Howard, the boy who had disappeared first, was found in Irvington, Indiana. He had been killed probably with cyanide, and Holmes had made a really clumsy attempt to burn the body up in a stove, which doesn't work. You can't actually cremate somebody in a regular old stove. The girls were buried in a shallow grave. By the time they were found, there wasn't enough that could be done to determine the cause of death. There were also 3 other Peitzels, Carrie, their older sister, Desi, and little baby Wharton, who were still alive at the time. There's Howard and Desi. See, there are more and more pictures of these that have kind of disappeared now. But this is the discovery. This was kind of late in the investigation in Chicago that they found Howard. It was pretty well illustrated in the Indiana papers. Now, in Holmes' confession, and this still turns up all over the place, he said that he lured the 2 girls into a trunk and then attached it to a gas line on the wall, though it was pointed out the next day there wasn't actually a gas line in that house at all. There was a story that they found a trunk with a hole in it, but that was actually found in Indiana, not in Toronto. It would have disappeared before Holmes got to Toronto with the girls. So it's not really known what happened there, but these would have been his last murders, Alice and Nellie Peitzel. It was shortly after that he was captured, held in jail for about 1.5 years before he was eventually hanged. And that takes us right through a list of the victims of H.H. Holmes. So, all right, everybody. Just a quick plug for upcoming stuff. I don't have the upcoming thing here. This is just like an older one from September down here. But Thursday night is our annual Victorian-themed virtual time travel pub crawl, Drink Like the Dickens. We are going to be virtually traveling around to various pubs associated with Charles Dickens and recreating drinks from his works, things like Smoking Bishop, Dickens' own recipe for punch. If you look at the events page, you can find links to recipes for a whole bunch of them. It's a really fun virtual tour that we do every year. Drink Like the Dickens. And so with that, everybody, I will open this up for questions. Put up the thanks box right here. Or, let's put up this one today. And so thanks a lot for joining. We will put the Benny Goodman back on and just hang out like we always do. So thanks a lot, everybody. Well, Martin, he tried. He didn't do it successfully. On a virtual time travel pub crawl, you drink whatever you want. Even if it's just water, that's fine. Alexa, clear my notifications. That's how that light was bothering me. No, I didn't see my picture in 6th page yet. They might have sent it to me over on Instagram. I don't get alerts for Instagram messages. Instagram is the absolute worst way to get a hold of me. But yeah, there we are. Oh, yep. There it is. Once again, there's my painting. Sick Fisher is one of our favorite muralists around town. Every Monday we do Mural Monday at 10 a.m. Aaron, Holmes did spend a little bit of time in Burlington, both as a younger man and while traveling. There was a story that he had rigged up a booby trap to kill Carrie Peitzel there. The sheriff didn't find looked over the place and didn't find the booby trap. I found the note about that just a little bit too late to make it into the book. They never actually pulled anything off in Burlington. that we know of, unless he did something when he was studying medicine there. Thanks, Eleanor. Hey, Don. Hey, Trash Bag Fashion Lover over on YouTube. We have just made it into the post-show hang. If you stick around later, once we're actually done here, the whole video will be back up if you want to go back through and watch. And of course, on the Patreon, you've now got about 2 years worth of the stuff if you sign up on the H.H. Holmes and Johann Hawk tier. Stuff from my Holmes archives, which are pretty extensive. And now we're tying it in. I'm working on a book on Johann Hawk, a serial killer who came about 10 years later, and it involves a lot of the same characters from this saga. I spent the last couple of months gathering and organizing my Hawk data. I've been gradually building it up over the years. Now I'm filling all the holes. One week I was in like 5 different archives. And now we're really just down to like getting tiny bitty details. But on the Patreon, every Friday is a Holmes Hawk & Company day where I publish data and cool archival stuff and ephemera. Is there a way to unsee the topless Johann Hawk? No. And those of you who might have missed it, this wasn't the whole post this week. It was just the header image. But here's a picture of Johann Hawk naked. This is dramatizing his attempt to fake his death at one point. One day he left his watch and some clothes on the banks of the Ohio, hoping that residents of Wheeling, West Virginia would think that he had drowned himself. It fooled none of them. He almost certainly did not really take off his clothes and get in the water. But someone in the 1970s decided they would illustrate that scene. This almost looks like Mario casting a spell here. Magic missile! Hey, let's all have a little more body positivity out there, folks. Spring break, yeah! I like that they did illustrate the happy trail down there. Well, it depends on if we're covering all the people he married or just the ones he killed. If I were doing just the ones he killed, it's only like 5 or 6. So we could cover that. Oh yeah, I couldn't keep that as a Patreon exclusive. But it accompanies a post of a scan of the coroner's inquest report on Marie Hawk, his last victim, which State Archive was able to locate for me earlier this year. Rebecca, this would have been early summer that he disappeared there, like July, I think. So no polar bears in Wheeling, West Virginia at the time. It's really interesting pulling up, like, doing some Google Street View walks through the neighborhood where he lived in West Virginia, right on the riverbanks. It's like a lot of the buildings look like they're still there and haven't been painted since.
Again, we hear Helen Ward singing.
And yeah, like 2-story houses there are going for like $8,000 or something. Does Holmes have any living relatives? Yeah, his great-great-grandson, Jeff, is still around. And I hear occasionally about, like, other cousins and stuff. So I always tell when people are related to these kind of people, if you don't have actual data in a trunk or something, it doesn't mean that much. Judy, that's possible. Well, Automat's coming on TCM in 10 minutes, I guess. That's a cool movie. It's also on HBO Max. All about the history of the Automat restaurants. They used to be all over New York and tried to move into Chicago briefly, but just didn't make it. Yeah, I've actually come up to some zither portions of the Hawk story and what I'm working on here. Did Holmes or Hawk have pets? Yeah, we don't have much data about them. But Holmes usually had a dog, often a horse. His wife said that he was a really big animal lover. Hawk, I know, went to pick up, shortly after he moved into his last Chicago house with his wife Marie, he went to pick up her dog and some birds. But all we really got is like one line about it in the trial. The dog probably ended up going to live with her sister Bertha. All right, Lisa, enjoy the latkes. Does Hawk have any living relatives? If he does, they'd be in Germany. He didn't have kids with any of his American wives. He had a few with his first wife in Germany, but I don't really know what became of any of them. Whether he even did anything physical with his wives here is kind of an open question. I've never found, like with Holmes, we have a few references indicating that he did. With Hawk, I got just about nothing. It was a very business proposition with him.
Transform sweet resignation into sweet dance music. I surrender, dear.
But come on. He was often described as a very handsome man at the time. Hey, Kathy. And they say, hey, and Jen, thanks for the socks, too. We got the, let me go grab those. Okay, well, the kitchen got cleaned, and now I don't know where the socks went. Well, I got some great socks that say, I like spooky shit and eternal 7th grader. That's about right. Oh, thank you, Karen. Kenosha's a long drive for lunch. I've been known to go there for the Cheese Castle. Georgia, Venmo is best. Zelle works too, though. Whatever you got, I'm not that picky. Yeah, Venmo is also Adam Chicago. Yeah, it's different. I finally found my hard drive where I have a bunch of these Benny at the Congress Hotel things that are harder to find online these days. They used to be up on archive, and I'm glad I downloaded it when I did 10 or 15 years ago. Oh, look who's come to see us here. It's Miles. Hey, Miles. Here we go. This is Miles. Had to make his appearance. He already showed up with Priya on the couch earlier.
Ellen Ward and the band go to town on the words and music of Yankee Doodle Never Went to Town.
Happy holidays to you too, Richard. Oh, flopping down. That's okay, Miles. Deck's already a mess. Yeah, come on out. Let's do baby hold. How about that? Want to try TikTok, kitty? We don't do TikTok much. Come on. I'm going to learn right now, okay? It's the box. TikTok, 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 TikTok. I know, it's more of a Charlotte thing.
Yankee Doodle never went to town. Just discovered the story was phony. Let me give you all there is no doubt. Didn't even own a pony. He was really very short and fast. In the story, skinny and bony. And so hungry that he ate his food. Called the feather macaroni. Underneath the chestnut tree, he and the blacksmith sipped their tea. Then heaving out his head before an old horse down. That's how he went to town. Yankee Doodle tried to leave one day. Took belongings, mounted his saddle. But she never started on.
Now, Miles is presently mellow. Give him until about 3 o'clock when I try to work again. But Debbie, he can't really do airplane rides anymore. He's too big. So this song is about how Yankee Doodle never really even had a pony, apparently. Kind of up my alley. Did Dr. Warren really ground farts at the mill? As some verses claim? I don't know, Miles. What do you think? Do you think Dr. Warren used to grind farts at the mill?
And for a parting shot, Honeysuckle Rose.
Oh, he is purring and purring now. Yeah, let's turn so you can see you, Miles. Oh, he's really purring this morning. put your butt on there, sure. All right, everybody. It's 11 o'clock, time for lunch around here. So thanks a lot for joining me, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow for Mural Monday. And I have got to get back to work on putting together the whole story of Johann Hawk. So I will see you all tomorrow morning. Thanks a lot for joining me. I'm Adam from Mysterious Chicago Tours, telling everybody to stay safe and stay strong. Miles is going to go hop down on the record player over here and go check out one of the menorahs. And, all right, that's Benny wrapping up, so that's a perfect time. Stay spooky, everybody. Have a great day.